Day my father died, it rained from morning to night without stopping. I remember standing at his graveside in a borrowed black jacket. Mine didn't fit anymore, hadn't for years, watching the water pool and the tire tracks left by the hearse. My brother Roy stood across from me, dry under a wide umbrella my sister-in-law held for him. He didn't offer to share it. He didn't look at me once during the whole service. That probably should have told me something. My name is Walter. I'm 63 years old, and I spent most of my life being the kind of man other people don't notice in a room. Not invisible exactly, just unremarkable. I worked 27 years as a land records clerk for the county assessor's office. I know how to read a deed. I know what an easement looks like in a legal description. I know the difference between fee simple ownership and a life estate. None of that ever made me interesting at a dinner party, but it's the only reason I'm standing here today, in a house I own outright, writing this down. My father had two sons and one piece of property. Roy got the house, I got the garage. Not the main house, a colonial on 2 acres in Western Virginia that my father had paid off 30 years ago. The one with the wraparound porch and the vegetable garden my mother kept, until she couldn't anymore. Roy got that. Roy, who lived 40 minutes away in a subdivision with a homeowners association and a neighborhood pool, who visited maybe 4 times a year, who called our father the old man when he wasn't listening. I got the garage. Technically, it was described in the will as the secondary structure and detached parcel located at the rear of the property, being approximately 0.38 acres, including the access easement along the western boundary. My father's attorney read it out in a flat voice, like he was reading a grocery list. Roy didn't even try to hide the small smile at the corner of his mouth. My wife, my ex-wife, Dorothy, sat next to me and squeezed my hand. But when I looked at her, she was looking at Roy's wife, and there was something in her eyes I didn't understand yet. The garage was a cinder block building, maybe 40 feet by 60. My father had built it in 1987 to store equipment from his landscaping business, which he sold in 2001. Since then it had sat empty except for some old shelving units, a broken chest freezer, and about 30 years of dust. The roof had a patch on the northwest corner where a limb had come through in 2018. My father had repaired it himself, with corrugated metal and exterior caulk. It held, but it looked like what it was, a repair made by an old man who didn't want to ask for help. Roy shook my hand in the parking lot after the reading. "You know," he said, "Dad always said you were more sentimental about that old place than I was. He probably thought you'd want something to remember it by." I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. Dorothy waited until we were in the car. "What exactly are we supposed to do with a cinder block garage in the middle of nowhere?" she said. I told her I didn't know yet. "Roy offered to buy it from us," she said. "He mentioned it to Karen while you were in the bathroom. He said he'd give us 50,000. I asked when that conversation happened. "Before the reading," she said. I drove the rest of the way home without talking. We had been married 31 years. I want to be careful here, because I don't believe in rewriting history just because things ended badly. Dorothy was not a cruel woman. She was practical in a way that I had once found steadying and later found exhausting. She wanted things to be comfortable and organized and moving forward, and for a long time I provided that, slowly, carefully, in the way I did most things. We had a daughter who lived in Portland now, and a son in the Navy, and a house with a mortgage we were 5 years from paying off. What we did not have was the kind of money Roy had. Roy worked in commercial real estate development. He and Karen took 2 vacations a year, international ones. Their kids went to private school. Whenever we were together as a family, Dorothy watched Karen the way you watch something you want and have decided you deserve. After the estate settled, Roy started calling about the garage once a month. The offers went up. 50,000 became 70, 70 became 90. He was always friendly about it, always framed it as doing me a favor. "That thing's just going to cost you money, Walter. Property taxes, liability, upkeep. Let me take it off your hands." I told him I wasn't ready to decide. Dorothy stopped having that conversation with me directly. She started having it with the walls, with the ceiling, with her coffee cup in the morning. "Some people make decisions," she would say, not looking at me. "Some people just let things sit." I drove out to the garage on a Tuesday in October, about 4 months after my father's funeral. I hadn't been there since the estate closed. I brought a flashlight and the thermos of coffee and the folder of documents the attorney had given me: deed, survey, title abstract, a few miscellaneous papers that had been found in my father's file cabinet and passed along without much comment. I unlocked the side door and went in. It smelled like cold concrete and old motor oil. The light through the two small windows was gray and flat. I stood there for a minute, just looking at the shelving, the broken freezer, the rafter where a bird had built a nest sometime in the last decade. I thought about my father building this place when I was in middle school, how he'd let me hand him tools on Saturday mornings, how he explained each bolt and beam like it mattered that I understood. I sat down on an overturned plastic bucket and opened the folder. Most of it was what I expected. The deed was straightforward. The survey showed the parcel boundaries, the access easement along the western edge. The title abstract went back 4 transfers, nothing unusual. Then I got to the miscellaneous papers. There were 3 documents kept together with a rusted binder clip. The first was a letter dated September 2009 from something called the Shenandoah Valley Fiber Consortium. I read it twice. It was addressed to my father and described an infrastructure easement agreement for the installation and maintenance of fiber optic conduit along the western boundary of the parcel, the same easement line shown on the survey. The letter referenced a recorded document number and mentioned quarterly payments to the property owner as described in Exhibit A. The second document was Exhibit A. I read it 3 times. The payment schedule started at $6,200 per quarter. It included an escalation clause, 3% annually, compounding, and the agreement ran for 40 years from the date of execution, with 2 automatic 10-year renewal options if neither party gave notice. The consortium had the right to access the conduit for maintenance but could not expand without renegotiation. The third document was a ledger page in my father's handwriting. Dates going back to late 2009. Dollar amounts. Quarterly, like clockwork, with a notation at the top: fiber easement, western line. My father had been receiving payments for 16 years. I sat on that bucket for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily. I come from people who thought of crying the way they thought of most strong feelings, something you did privately, if at all. But sitting in that cold garage in the building my father had constructed with his own hands, reading his careful handwriting on that ledger page, I came very close. He knew. He knew what he was leaving me. He didn't leave me a garage. He left me a revenue stream attached to a piece of land that was already generating more money annually than Dorothy made in her best year. He left it to me specifically, not to Roy, not to the estate, not split between us. And he never said a word about it. Not in 30 years of quarterly deposits, not in the letter he left with the attorney, not once. I thought about Roy's offers: 50,000, 70, 90. The current quarterly payment after 16 years of compounding was a little over $10,000. Roy had been calling me every month offering to buy something he didn't understand the value of. He'd been doing it with a smile, framing it as generosity, and I had been sitting on my hands while Dorothy sighed at the ceiling. I folded the documents carefully, put them back in the folder, and drove home. I did not tell Dorothy that night. I want to explain that decision because I know how it sounds. It sounds like deception. Maybe it was, but I had been married 31 years to a woman who communicated primarily with Roy's wife, who had been in the parking lot talking about selling my inheritance before the estate reading was even finished, and I needed time to think. I called a property attorney in Staunton the next morning. I explained the situation. She asked me to bring all the documents, which I did, and she spent 2 hours going through them while I drank bad coffee in her waiting room. When she came out, she said the agreement was valid, properly recorded, and currently active. The consortium had made every payment on time for 16 years. The escalation clause was enforceable. Under current projections, the remaining payment term, including 1 renewal option, was worth approximately $840,000 in total future payments, assuming the 3% escalation held. She also told me something I hadn't thought to ask. Because the easement was recorded against the western boundary parcel, my parcel, and not against the main property, Roy had no claim to it. None. My father had structured the division of the property in a way that made the easement inseparable from my inheritance. If Roy had somehow convinced me to sell, I would have transferred the easement with the land for $90,000. I thanked her and drove back in silence. I want to say I was angry at Roy. I want to say I sat in that car and felt the righteous heat of it. But the truth is, what I felt was tired. Tired and something quieter than sad. My father had seen something in me, maybe just the fact that I worked with land records, maybe something else, and he trusted me with a piece of his life's work that he protected for 16 years without mentioning it to anyone. And I had almost given it away because my wife was sighing at the ceiling and my brother was calling every month with a friendly voice and a bigger number. Roy called on a Thursday 2 weeks after I'd been to the attorney. "I've been thinking," he said. "Karen and I talked, and honestly, Walter, we'd go to 110. Final offer. That's a fair price for a cinder block building on a third of an acre." "I know about the fiber agreement," I said. There was a pause. "The what?" "The infrastructure easement, the quarterly payments, the 40-year agreement with the escalation clause." Another pause. Longer this time. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Roy." I kept my voice flat. "I worked in land records for 27 years. The agreement is recorded at the county. Anyone can pull it up." He was quiet for a moment, and then his tone shifted. Not angry, not apologetic, just recalibrating, like a man adjusting his footing on uneven ground. "Look," he said, "Dad's gone. We're the only family we've got. There's no reason to make this complicated." "I'm not selling," I said. "Walter, I'm not selling," I said again, "and I'd appreciate it if you stopped calling about it." I hung up. Dorothy was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had heard at least the end of it. "The fiber agreement," she said carefully. "I told her then, all of it. The documents, the attorney, the payment history, the projected total value." I watched her face while I talked. I had been married to her for 31 years, and I could read her face the way I could read a deed. Every clause, every encumbrance, everything that had been quietly attached without announcement. What I saw was not happiness for me. What I saw was the math. "110,000 is still a lot of money," she said when I finished. I looked at her. "I just told you it's worth over 800,000 in future payments alone. Roy's been making lowball offers for 6 months. He knew or he suspected and he never said a word. He's your brother," she said. "He shook my hand in a parking lot and told me Dad left me that garage as a sentimental gesture," I said. "While his wife was telling you to encourage me to sell." She looked away. "How long have you been talking to Karen about this?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, she said, "I just don't understand why you have to make everything so difficult." I understood then what I had been watching build for years, maybe longer than I wanted to admit. The way she angled toward Roy and Karen at family events. The way she repeated things they said like they were facts. The way she had been sighing at the ceiling every night for 6 months while Roy's offers got bigger. I don't know if she'd been passing information to Karen. I don't know what exactly had been said. What I knew was that my wife, when I told her I had something worth fighting for, asked me why I had to make everything so difficult. We separated 4 months later. The divorce was final the following spring. I want to be clear about something, because I know how these stories are supposed to end, and this one is a little different. I didn't become rich overnight. I didn't walk into Roy's office building and drop papers on his desk while a string section played. I didn't do anything dramatic at all. What I did was this. I had the garage roof properly repaired. Real flashing this time, new decking, not corrugated sheet metal and caulk. I had the electrical brought up to code. I poured a new section of concrete floor where the old one had cracked along the north wall. I put in 2 skylights. Then I leased it. A small woodworking operation out of Charlottesville needed storage and workspace. They signed the 3-year lease. Modest amount, nothing spectacular, but it covers the property taxes and the insurance and leaves a little over. The quarterly easement payments deposit automatically. After the divorce settlement, I kept the garage parcel free and clear. I moved into a rental apartment for about 8 months while things settled. It was smaller than I was used to, and the upstairs neighbor had a dog that liked to run laps at 6 in the morning. And I cooked a lot of soup and read a lot of books and honestly, slept better than I had in years. My daughter called from Portland when the divorce finalized. "Are you okay, Dad?" "Yes," I said, and meant it. "Roy's been telling people you went a little strange after Grandpa died," she said. "Roy can say whatever he likes," I said. She laughed. "She sounds like my mother when she laughs. I looked up the easement thing," she said. In the county records, like you told me, Dad. Grandpa planned that. I know, I said. He knew you'd be the one to find it. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside my apartment window, a maple tree had gone completely red and gold. It was October again, almost exactly a year since I'd sat on that plastic bucket in the cold garage with a flashlight and a thermos. Yeah, I said, I think he did. Roy and I have not spoken since that phone call. Karen sent a Christmas card in December, a generic one, the kind you buy in boxes of 20, with both their names printed at the bottom and no handwritten note. I sent nothing back. That might make me petty. I thought about it and decided I could live with that. Dorothy is living in the house we shared. She got it in the settlement. Her name had been on it longer, and I didn't want to fight about it. The mortgage has 5 more years on it. That's her math to do now. What I have is this: a cinder block building my father put up in 1987 with a new roof and 2 skylights under woodworker's equipment, stacked neatly along the east wall. A quarterly deposit that hits my account with the reliability of sunrise. A rental apartment I've come to think of as peaceful rather than small. A daughter who calls on Sundays. A son who sends photographs from wherever the Navy has him this month. And something else harder to name. My father was a quiet man. He built things with his hands and kept his own counsel and did not explain himself to people who weren't paying attention. For most of my life, I thought I had inherited his silence without his reason for it, that I was just a man who didn't say much because there wasn't much to say. I think now that I had it wrong. He left me the garage because he knew I would do what he had done, read the documents, sit with the numbers, not be dazzled by the first offer that came along. He left it to me because he believed, without ever saying so, that the kind of patience that makes other people uncomfortable is not a flaw. It is, in fact, the whole game. I went back to the garage on a morning in early spring. The woodworker's truck already in the lot, the sound of a table saw running inside. I stood at the corner of the building where the new roof met the old cinder block and put my hand on the wall. The concrete was cold and rough and exactly what it was. Nothing more, nothing less. Solid. Built to last. I thought about all the things Roy saw when he looked at this building: a liability, a tax burden, a negotiating chip, a sentimental old man's mistake. I thought about what my father saw when he built it. I think I finally understand. The quarterly deposit cleared yesterday. I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and watched the number on my screen for a minute before I closed the laptop. Some people spend their whole lives looking for the thing that will change everything, the big deal, the dramatic reversal, the moment where someone finally sees what they're worth. I found mine in a folder of dusty papers in a cinder block building in Western Virginia, in my father's careful handwriting on a ledger page that nobody else had bothered to read. I'm not a remarkable man. I never claimed to be. But I paid attention, and it turned out that was enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. That's one of the gifts of getting older. You stop needing to rush toward conclusions. You just let things settle until you can see them clearly. What I keep coming back to is this: Roy didn't lose because he was greedy. He lost because he was careless. There's a difference. Greedy people at least pay attention to the thing they want. Roy never paid attention to anything he didn't immediately understand. He looked at that garage and saw a number. He never once asked what was underneath the number, what was attached to it, what my father had been quietly building for 16 years inside a set of documents nobody else thought to read. That carelessness cost him, not because the universe punished him for being a bad brother. I don't believe it works that cleanly, but because every choice has a shape, and Roy's choices had been forming a very specific shape for a very long time. He moved fast. He talked well. He assumed that confidence was the same thing as competence. And when something didn't fit neatly into what he already knew, he dismissed it rather than investigated it. That pattern had probably served him fine in commercial real estate, where you can bluster your way through a lot. It didn't serve him in a county records office at 8 in the morning with a deed abstract and a binder clip. Dorothy is a harder thing to reckon with. I spent 31 years building a life with that woman. I don't think she set out to do me harm. I think she made a series of small choices over a long time, choosing Karen's perspective over mine, choosing Roy's estimate of my worth over her own experience of it, And those choices accumulated into something neither of us fully recognized until it was already the shape of our marriage. When I told her what that carriage was actually worth, she calculated. I watched her do it. And the fact that her first instinct was to calculate rather than to feel anything on my behalf, that told me everything about where we had ended up. What I've learned, if learned is even the right word, is that integrity is not a single dramatic moment. It's just the slow accumulation of small, honest choices made when nobody is watching. My father made those choices for 16 years. He read every document, he kept every record. He planned something for me without announcement, without credit, without any guarantee I'd even find it. That is not luck. That is character, expressed over decades, and the intelligence required to find what he left. I want to be honest about this. It wasn't brilliance. It was just patience and the willingness to sit in a cold garage on an overturned bucket and read every page in a folder that everyone else had already written off as miscellaneous. That's available to anyone. Most people just don't do it because it's slow and unglamorous and the payoff isn't immediate. The resilience part is the one I'm still working on. Moving into that small apartment, cooking soup alone, listening to a dog run laps upstairs, there was nothing triumphant about that season of my life. It was just quiet and a little lonely and necessary. I didn't handle it with grace every day. Some days I handled it badly and then went to sleep and tried again in the morning. But I stayed. I stayed with the hard thing long enough to understand it. And I think that's all any of us can really do. Pay attention, tell the truth, and keep going when the going is just ordinary and difficult and unremarkable. That was enough for my father. I'm trying to make it enough for me.